In the courtroom, my wife's lawyer mocked my $14 welder shirt. He sneered, "This poor laborer isn't fit to raise a child." My wife glanced at the young intern beside me and laughed. "You can't even afford a real lawyer." I stayed silent, my rough hands resting on the table. But when the judge asked for my real identity, I slowly placed my federal badge on the desk. Seconds later, federal agents stormed into the courtroom. Cue. In the courtroom, my wife's lawyer sneered at my $14 welder's shirt. He mocked, "This poor laborer is unfit to raise a child." I stayed silent, my calloused hands flat on the table. But when the judge asked for my identity, the air froze. I slowly placed my top-secret federal badge on the table. Suddenly, federal marshals stormed in, declaring 5 words of arrest that made my betraying wife collapse in terror. I'm so grateful to have you here to help us connect. Please comment below which city or country are you watching from. Note: this story includes fictional elements for entertainment and education. Any resemblance to specific names or settings is coincidental, but the message shared is intended to be useful for your journey. I got home at 11:17. I didn't turn on the lights. 18 years in, this business teaches you that light is for seeing, but darkness is for understanding. I sat in my home office. The smell of machine oil from my welding shift was still on my hands, the smell of the welder, not the agent. Outside, a sliver of streetlight cut through the curtains, stopping at my boot like a boundary nobody drew, but everyone knows is there. Then the transmitter I'd hidden behind the family portrait came to life. Clara's voice came first, quiet, careful. "He already has the data key." A man's voice answered, low with a faint non-American lilt. "Yesterday, the brother delivered on time." "And the medication?" A second of silence. "I've spent 2 decades learning to read silence like pros. Since April. Benzodiazepine low dose," he said. "Enough to dull his edges, not enough for a tox screen to catch. He's questioning himself more than anyone around him." I sat frozen in the dark. "The life insurance policy, 10 million... Clara's voice was flat, like a grocery list. "Senator Hale confirmed the file stays untouched for 6 months. The window for us to..." "Be patient," he cut her off. "Everything is on schedule." I looked at my hands. Calloused, burned by welding sparks. These weren't the hands of the man who once ran high-level reports for CISA. Right now they were shaking. Not from fear, but from the sound of something breaking inside me. They weren't just having an affair. They were killing me. $10 million, a staged seizure video, a bought senator. My own brother had sold the key, and the medication dissolved into my morning coffee every day before I kissed my daughter goodbye had been in my blood for over a year. Outside New York kept moving. I pressed a hand to my chest. My heart was steady. 18 years of training, don't let the feeling break the work. The transmitter went quiet. I sat in that darkness for 3 more hours. I didn't cry. I didn't make a sound. I just reorganized every name, date, and number in my head like a case file. Tonight was not the first night I had sat in this chair. This was night number 402. Night number 402. Hold that number. 402 nights of sitting in the dark, listening to them plan my funeral. 402 mornings of drinking poisoned coffee. 402 days welding steel in Newark for $19 an hour, coming home with burned hands and a broken back. You're asking, why didn't he just run or call it in? To understand, you need to know who I am. My name is Arthur James Dalton. For 18 years, I was a supervisory special agent with CISA, working in a division that doesn't exist on any public website. My clearance was top secret/SCI, the kind where you don't talk in rooms with windows. My specialty was high-tech financial crime shell companies, layered transfers, and money laundering at a global scale. I was good at it. My case closure rate was the only number my supervisors never questioned. Then one evening, I heard my wife calmly discussing the timeline for my death. Why didn't I call it in? Because the moment I did the case would belong to someone else. Someone who'd pull the wrong string and watch the whole network scatter. And more importantly, they would move Chloe, my 10-year-old daughter. I wasn't letting anyone touch her until I was ready. So I did what 18 years of federal law enforcement prepared me to do. I built a cover. I walked away from my badge and my salary. I rented a tiny apartment in Kearney for $700 a month and went to work at the shipyard. I stayed there for 1,500 days. Not because I had to, but because I was hunting. The only way to catch a trap is to look like you don't know it's there. Tomorrow, the trap closes. But this story started long before the courtroom. It started the night I realized the man I'd been hunting for 4 years had been hunting me first. Let's go back further. Before the hunting, before the transmitter, back to when it still looked like a love story. I met Clara at a DC fundraiser. She ran development strategy for a nonprofit tied to the Meridian Capital Foundation. She moved with confidence that owned the room. We talked for 2 hours. She was sharp, dryly funny, and didn't push when I gave her my approved career summary, federal financial oversight. I thought she was interesting. I should have considered exactly what kind of interest. We married 14 months later. My son Leo, 16, and quiet shook her hand with formal politeness. He spent the wedding watching the room from the shadows. He reminded me of myself. I didn't know then how much that would matter. Chloe was born 2 years later, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. In that hospital room at 2 in the morning, holding her, I felt something I had no professional vocabulary for. But I need you to understand my mistake. A single catastrophic error in a careful life. I knew about Clara's father before the wedding. His name appeared twice in CISA's database, not as a target, but as a known associate of a financial network with cartel ties in 3 countries. It wasn't definitive, but it was there. I ran the check myself, I read the file, and then I made the one decision I can never justify. I decided she had left that world behind. I believed people could be more than their family's history because I wanted to believe it. Standing in that hospital room looking at Chloe, I pressed my thumb against her tiny hand and made a promise: I will protect you, always, no matter the cost. I didn't know the cost would be 1,500 days. I didn't know that by choosing to believe in the love story, I had already handed my enemy the knife. I want to be honest about that because it would be easy to look back now and pretend I always knew something was wrong. I didn't. Year 1 and year 2 were genuinely good dinners at home weekends with Chloe in the park, Leo visiting from school and eating everything in the refrigerator without apology. Clara was sharp and warm and present in the way a real partner is present. She challenged me. She made me laugh. She asked good questions and listened to the answers. Year 3 was when the kitchen started feeling different. It happened the way most things happen in a marriage, not with one dramatic moment, but with 100 small ones that you keep explaining away. Clara coming home at 9 instead of 7. The way her phone screen would tilt slightly away from me when I walked past. The weekend trips for conferences that I never thought to verify because I never had a reason to verify anything before. And then there was the spending. Small amounts, careful amounts. The kind of numbers that wouldn't trigger any automatic alert on a joint account. 300 here, 1,000 there, routed through platforms that looked ordinary if you weren't trained to look deeper. I noticed them the way I notice everything. I filed them in the back of my mind and told myself I was overreacting. At the time, I thought that voice, the one saying, "Slow down, you're reading too much into this," was my own conscience keeping me fair. I didn't know it was the medication. Julian had given the order sometime in March. Benzodiazepine dissolved in low concentration introduced into the coffee blend Clara brought home from a specialty roaster downtown. Not enough to make me feel drugged. Not enough to show on a routine blood panel. Just enough to soften the edges. Just enough to make the gap between seeing something and acting on something feel a little wider than it should. I would look at Clara across the kitchen table, Chloe between us eating cereal, morning light coming through the window, and feel the instinct stir. Something is off. And then almost immediately I would feel it quiet down again. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're projecting. Maybe 18 years of looking for threats in everything has finally started distorting how you see your own home. I had that thought almost every morning of year 3. I was a supervisory special agent with a top secret clearance and 18 years of field experience, and I spent an entire year questioning my own judgment instead of questioning my wife, because someone had spent 3 months carefully calibrating exactly how much chemistry it takes to make a man doubt himself without knowing why. Clara poured me coffee one morning and smiled across the counter. "You look tired, Arthur. You should get more sleep." I looked at the mug in my hands. "Yeah," I said. "You're probably right." I drank it. I drank that coffee every morning for 9 more months. And for 9 months I kept telling myself the same thing: you are tired. You are projecting. The job has made you paranoid, and the paranoia has followed you home. And the most dangerous thing a man in this profession can do is start treating his own family like a case file. So I didn't. And then January came. It was a Tuesday. It's almost midnight. Clara was asleep. Chloe had been asleep since 8:30. The apartment was quiet, in the particular way that only apartment buildings are quiet. You can hear the pipes, the elevator, the faint bass from the unit above. I was at my desk, going through the household bank statements because we had a tax appointment in 2 weeks and I was the one who handled the paperwork. I almost missed it. $3,400. Transferred on November 9th from our joint checking account to an intermediary named Horizon Consulting Group, LLC, with a routing number that traced back to a Delaware holding company. The memo line read, "Professional services rendered." I sat there and looked at that line for a long time. $3,400 is not a suspicious number. It is precisely the kind of number that is designed to not be suspicious large enough to mean something small enough to hide under the noise of ordinary life. A car repair, a medical bill, a contractor. Anyone else would have moved on. I opened a second tab. Horizon Consulting Group, LLC had been incorporated 11 months ago. Its registered agent was a law firm in Wilmington that served as registered agent for approximately 4,000 other companies. Its listed business address was a mailbox at a UPS store on Lexington Avenue. I opened a third tab. The law firm in Wilmington appeared twice in CISA's peripheral database, not flagged, not active, but noted, associated with a financial structure that had been flagged for review 3 years ago and then quietly closed when the primary subject moved jurisdiction. The primary subject was listed under an entity called Meridian Capital. I closed the tabs, cleared the browser history, went to bed. I lay down next to Clara in the dark and stared at the ceiling and listened to her breathe. Slow, even. The breathing of someone with a clean conscience or someone with a very good performance. I didn't know which one yet. I pressed one hand flat against the mattress the way I used to press my hand against a table during long surveillance nights to keep myself from drifting. Stay awake, stay sharp, don't assume, don't conclude, just follow the thread. $3,400. I had started cases on less. 1 to 2 hours a night after Clara fell asleep. That was all I allowed myself. Any more and I would make mistakes. Any less and the trail would go cold. I opened my personal encrypted laptop, not the household one, and I began. I didn't know yet what Meridian Capital was. I didn't know yet who Julian was. I was just pulling one thread in the dark. But in 18 years of doing this, I had learned one thing that never changed. There is no such thing as a random transaction. 1 to 2 hours every night on the encrypted laptop through 7 layers of VPN tracing shell companies the way you trace a river back to its source, patiently, methodically accepting that you will hit dead ends and that dead ends are information too. By June, I had connected Horizon Consulting Group to 3 other entities, all of them pointing toward a parent structure called Meridian Capital, and all of them showing transaction patterns that matched a financial network CISA had flagged and then quietly walked away from 3 years earlier. I needed a face. Numbers can lie. Shell companies can be restructured overnight. But a face in a federal database is a different kind of evidence. A face means a person. A person makes mistakes. I followed Clara on a Thursday evening in June. I had done surveillance for 18 years. I knew how to follow someone through Manhattan without being seen 3 car lengths back, never the same lane twice, always one turn behind. Clara took a car service to Tribeca. I parked on the opposite side of the street and waited. He came out of the building at 7:42, tall, well-dressed in the way that is meant to look effortless. He walked to Clara's car door and opened it himself, and when she stepped out, he put one hand on the small of her back. Not the way a colleague touches someone, not the way a friend touches someone, but the way a man touches a woman. He has been touching for a long time and no longer thinks about whether anyone is watching. I raised the binoculars. I looked at his face for 4 seconds. Then I put the binoculars down and sat very still in my car. I knew that face. Not personally. From a file. A CIS, a Persons of Interest database. Eastern European Financial Networks Division, a profile that had been flagged, reviewed, and marked inactive 18 months ago due to insufficient evidence for prosecution. The file had a note attached, subject believed to have relocated, last known location, Eastern Europe. He had not relocated to Eastern Europe. He had relocated to Tribeca. I sat in that car for 3 hours. I watched the lights in the building. I did not call anyone. I did not reach for my phone. I sat and I thought through every implication of what I had just seen. Not as a husband, not as a man who had just watched his wife walk into a building with another man's hand on her back, but as an agent who had just discovered that a flagged person of interest in an active financial network was sleeping with a woman who had access to one of the most significant investment funds in the northeastern United States. This was not an affair. This was an operation. I drove home. I parked. I went upstairs. Clara was already back. She came home before me, which told me the building had a second exit I hadn't covered. Good to know. I kissed her on the cheek. She smiled. I read Chloe a chapter from her book until she fell asleep. I made tea. I sat in the living room and waited until I heard Clara's breathing slow from the bedroom. Then I got up, took the family portrait off the wall, and attached the transmitter to the back of the frame. I put the portrait back, straightened it carefully. Chloe was asleep in the next room. Clara was asleep in this one. And the man in that database photo, I still didn't know his name. I would find it. But right now, what I knew was enough. He had just made the only mistake in his entire plan. He let me see his face. After Tribeca, I listened every night. Sometimes there was nothing, just the ambient sound of an empty room, the hum of the heating system, an occasional door closing somewhere in the apartment. Sometimes there were fragments, a name, a number, a timeline discussed in the careful coded language of people who knew they needed to be careful. I was patient. I had been trained to be patient. Night 402 was different. They were in the room together, both of them. And for the first time since I had placed that transmitter, they stopped being careful. Julian spoke first. The key has been in my hands for 6 weeks. I've had 2 technicians working on it. The data is legitimate. And Fred Clara's voice, quieter than his. He won't talk. Fred has $2 million in gambling debts and a brother who hasn't spoken to him about anything meaningful in 3 years. He'll stay quiet because staying quiet is the only thing keeping him solvent. A pause. The video, Clara said. Finished. 64 seconds. Medically convincing. Fred held the camera. He didn't know what he was shooting until it was done. I told him it was for an insurance documentation project. I sat completely still in the dark. My brother. Fred had held the camera. The policy pays at $10 million on accidental death or incapacitation. Julian continued, and his voice had the flat efficiency of a man reading a project update. The benzodiazepine protocol has been running for 14 months. At current dosage, we're looking at cumulative hippocampus involvement within the next 6 to 8 months, enough to support a competency challenge if one becomes necessary. Senator Hale has confirmed that no federal flag will be placed on the case file for the duration of the window. We have approximately 7 months. 7 months. I looked down at my hands. I had been a federal agent for 18 years. I had sat across tables from people who had done terrible things, and I had kept my face neutral because the face is a tool, and you do not waste tools on emotion. I was very good at this. I had always been very good at this. But sitting in that chair in the dark with my hands in my lap and the voices of my wife and the man she had chosen coming through the speaker 6 feet away from me, I want to be honest with you. I sat there for a long time before I could move. Not because I was broken, because I was deciding something. There is a version of this story where I get angry, where I call a contact that night and start the machinery moving before I'm ready, where I act from the part of me that was a husband before it was an agent. I did not do that. I thought about Chloe. $10 million, a senator, a data key, a staged video, a 14-month poisoning protocol. These were not the components of a domestic dispute. This was infrastructure. This was a system designed by someone who understood that the most effective way to destroy a careful man is to make the destruction look like natural deterioration. When they finished talking, I heard Clara walk to the other room. I heard the soft click of the bedroom door. I stayed in that chair until 4:30 in the morning. I was not designing revenge. I want you to understand that. I was designing something much more specific. I was mapping every single thing that needed to happen before Chloe would have somewhere safe to land when all of this came down. When the sun came through the curtain gap and laid its line of light across the floor again, I had a plan. Not the plan of a betrayed husband. The plan of an agent who had been doing this for 18 years. First step, disappear. Day 1, I drafted the resignation letter. 2 sentences. I am resigning from my position as supervisory special agent effective 30 days from today. Personal reasons. I had written confessions that were longer. Day 3, I signed a 12-month lease on a 480 square foot apartment in Kearney, New Jersey. $780 a month. The landlord handed me the keys without asking questions because cash deposits have a way of ending conversations before they start. Day 11, I sat across from my division director in his office on the 7th floor and slid the letter across his desk. He read it twice, looked up. Personal reasons. Yes. He studied me for a moment with the particular look of a man trying to decide whether to push. We had worked together for 9 years. He knew what I looked like when I was operational, and he knew what I looked like when I was done. All right, he said finally. He did not shake my hand. Take care of yourself, Arthur. I walked out of that building for the last time on a Wednesday afternoon in October, and I did not look back because looking back is a habit that gets people killed. And I intended to be very much alive at the end of all this. The shipyard in Newark hired me on a Friday. $42 to take the welding certification test at a community center in Elizabeth, New Jersey. I passed it without difficulty. I had spent 3 weeks practicing in the garage of a house I rented for the purpose. The foreman shook my hand and said, Monday 6 a.m., don't be late. I was not late. Marcus Webb found me at the equipment locker on the first morning the way experienced workers always find the new ones, with the combination of mild suspicion and basic decency that is the particular territory of men who have seen enough of life to know that showing off is for people who haven't. He handed me a spare face shield. "Have you done this before?" he asked. "Some," I said. "Some," he repeated, like the word tasted wrong. "You hold the torch like you've done more than some." "Maybe a little more than some." He looked at me for a second longer than necessary, then nodded once and went back to his station. That was how Marcus Webb introduced himself. I understood in that moment that we were going to get along fine. That evening, I sat on the floor of the Kearney apartment, no furniture yet except the mattress, and opened the encrypted laptop. 7 VPN layers. The kind of setup that takes 20 minutes to configure properly and is worth every second. My phone buzzed. Video call. Chloe's face appeared on screen, gap-toothed and bright-eyed, holding a stuffed rabbit I had given her when she turned 4. "Daddy, is your new home nice?" I looked around at the bare walls, the water stain on the ceiling, the window that faced a brick wall 6 feet away. "Very nice, sweetheart," I said. "Daddy's okay." She studied my face for a moment with the focused attention she had inherited from somewhere I recognized. "Okay," she said, apparently satisfied. "Good night, Daddy." "Good night, Chloe. I love you." She was gone. The screen went dark. I put the phone down and turned back to the laptop. On the screen, Horizon Consulting Group, LLC. The first name in a chain of 12 shell companies. I had already worked out how long this was going to take. I had already counted the days. 1,500. I had already counted. The first weekend I had Chloe at the Kearney apartment, I picked her up on a Saturday morning in November. She walked in through the door, looked around the apartment with the careful, unhurried attention of a 7-year-old who understands more than she is letting on, and said nothing about the size of it, nothing about the water stain on the ceiling, nothing about the fact that the furniture consisted of a mattress, 2 folding chairs, and a card table I had bought for $30 at a Goodwill on Route 9. She put her backpack down and said, "Daddy, what game are we playing today?" I had thought about this. I had thought about it for longer than I want to admit. I reached into the kitchen drawer and took out a small notebook, the kind with the wire spine and the graph paper, and a set of colored markers still in the packaging. I set them on the card table in front of her. "We're going to play detective," I said. Chloe looked at the notebook, then at me. Her expression was the particular expression of a child deciding whether something is worth being excited about. "How do you play?" "You draw everyone you see," I said. "Anyone interesting. You write the date, the time, what they look like, what color their jacket is. Everything you notice." I sat down across from her. "Like a real detective, we keep score and whoever draws the most accurate picture wins." She considered this for exactly 4 seconds. Then she picked up a red marker. "What does accurate mean?" "It means the picture looks exactly like the real person." "Oh," she uncapped the marker. "I'm good at that." "I know you are." She started drawing without another word, focused in the way that children are focused when they have decided something is real and worth their full attention. I watched her for a moment. 7 years old, dark hair that she kept pushing behind one ear, Clara's cheekbones. After a while she looked up. "Daddy, is this for observing?" I stopped. "What do you mean?" "The notebook." She tilted her head slightly, a gesture that was entirely her own, not mine, not Clara's. "You always say that before you go quiet, you observe first. Is the notebook for that?" I looked at my daughter across a $30 card table in a 480 square foot apartment in Kearney, New Jersey. "Yes," I said, "that's exactly what it's for." She nodded the slow, satisfied nod of someone whose theory has been confirmed and went back to drawing. We spent the rest of the afternoon in the park 2 blocks away. Chloe filled 4 pages. Her handwriting was already neater than mine. She dated every entry. That evening, I drove her home and walked her to the door and watched until the light in the hallway came on. I got back in the car and was about to pull away when I realized she had left the notebook on the back seat. I picked it up, opened to the first page. A drawing careful and deliberate of a man with silver hair standing in front of a townhouse. Beside it, in Chloe's handwriting, "This man stands outside Mommy's house sometimes. He doesn't smile. I don't like him." Below that, a date, last Tuesday. I recognized the face immediately. The months that followed had a rhythm to them that I want you to understand because it was not the dramatic rhythm of action movies or crime novels. It was the grinding, repetitive, unglamorous rhythm of a cover identity being maintained one day at a time. Wake up, coffee, drop Chloe at school on my custody mornings, drive to Newark, 8 hours of welding in a shipyard that smelled of salt water and hot metal and other men's sweat, drive back to Kearney, 1 to 2 hours on the encrypted laptop, sleep 4 or 5 hours. Repeat. That was my life for months. Marcus Webb made it bearable without knowing that was what he was doing. It was a Tuesday in February when he pushed a beer across the bar toward me and said without any preamble, "You want to talk about it or you want to just drink?" I looked at the beer. "Drink?" "Okay." He lifted his own bottle. We drank. 3 minutes passed. Then Marcus said, "She with someone else." Something like that. Is he rich? I turned the bottle slowly in my hands. Very. Marcus exhaled through his nose. Not a laugh. Not quite. The sound a man makes when life has confirmed something he already suspected. He reached over and hit my shoulder once with the flat of his hand, the way men of a certain generation express things they don't have vocabulary for. That hurts for real, he said. I'm not going to tell you it doesn't. I know. But you're still breathing. He pointed the neck of his bottle at me. That's the only thing that actually matters. You're still here. Everything else is just paperwork. I looked at the beer in my hand. I thought about the coffee I had drunk that morning. The specialty blend Clara had been buying from the downtown roaster for the past 14 months, ground fresh each week, tasting like absolutely nothing except good coffee. I thought about the benzodiazepine dissolved into it at concentrations precise enough to pass a standard tox screen. I thought about what 14 months of low-dose neurological interference does to the hippocampus, and I thought about the fact that I was sitting in this bar playing the role of a man being slowly destroyed by heartbreak when I was actually being slowly destroyed by something considerably more deliberate. Yeah, I said. I took a long drink of the beer. Still breathing is what matters. Marcus nodded, satisfied. He was a man who believed that simple truths were the most durable ones, and I had spent enough time around people who believed complicated things to understand why. We sat there for another hour. He told me about Fallujah, about his first wife who had left while he was on his second tour, about Tommy, the kid he had taken in at 14 now at MIT on a scholarship, always on a laptop, never looking up. That boy could hack the Pentagon and not notice, Marcus said with the particular mix of pride and bewilderment of a man raising someone smarter than himself. Sounds like a good kid, I said. He's the best thing I've done. Marcus finished his beer. You got kids? A daughter, she's 7. Then you've got everything you need to get through this. He stood up, left cash on the bar. See you tomorrow, 6 a.m. 6 a.m., I agreed. He walked out. I sat alone with the last inch of my beer and the weight of everything I was not saying, which was, as always, considerably heavier than everything I had said. That night, I took the antidote tablets Dr. Renata would later give me. I am telling this slightly out of order because the truth is a habit, and the truth is I had already sourced a counteragent before I found her. Tomorrow morning, I will drink the coffee again. Not because I had to, because I needed them to believe the medication was still working. The cover required it. I had been managing the counteragent on my own for 2 months before I understood I needed documentation. Not for myself. I knew what was happening to me. I could feel it in the particular way a man who has spent 18 years relying on his own cognitive precision feels something interfering with that precision. The slight delay between thought and action. The mornings where a name or a date would surface half a second slower than it should. Small things. Invisible things unless you were looking for them. I was always looking. But evidence for a federal case is not the same thing as knowing. Evidence is documented. Signed. Time-stamped. Chain of custody from collection to courtroom. I needed a doctor who would run the tests without asking the questions. The clinic on Broad Street in Newark was the kind of place that did not attract attention. Linoleum floors. Plastic chairs in a color that might have once been orange. A hand-lettered sign above the reception desk that listed the accepted forms of payment in 3 languages. The kind of clinic where people came because they needed help and couldn't afford the kind of help that came with questions. Dr. Renata Sousa had been practicing there for 11 years. She was a small woman with reading glasses who kept pushing up her nose and the particular manner of someone who had heard enough stories to recognize the shape of one before it was told. She sat across from me after the blood draw, looked at the preliminary panel results on her screen, then looked at me over the top of her glasses for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't want to know." I opened my mouth. "I mean it," she said, not unkindly. "Whatever the explanation is, I don't want it. It won't change what the results say, and it won't change what I'm about to do." She opened a drawer and took out a small sealed package medication, unlabeled, the kind of thing that exists in the gray margin between clinical and practical. She set it on the desk between us. "Every evening, don't skip, and be careful about whatever you're putting in your body in the mornings." I looked at the package, then at her. "How much?" "Nothing. Consider it the cost of being a doctor in a neighborhood where people don't always have the luxury of full explanations." She pulled her glasses off and cleaned them with the corner of her coat. "But I am going to keep a copy of these results, dated, signed, in a file with your name on it, whatever name you want to give me." "Arthur," I said. "Arthur." She wrote it in a folder. "Last name." I thought for exactly 1 second. "Dalton." She wrote that too, filed it. I stood up. The appointment apparently was over. "Thank you," I said. She pointed at the door without looking up from her desk. "Don't thank me. Just don't come back with something worse." I picked up the package and walked out. The afternoon was gray and cold, the kind of Newark afternoon that feels like the sky has given up on the day. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at the small package in my hand. A woman who didn't know what I did for a living, who hadn't asked for an explanation, who had looked at a blood panel and understood enough to know that understanding the rest wasn't her job, had just created the only legally documented evidence of an ongoing attempted murder that existed anywhere in the world. She had saved my life. More than that, she had saved my case. The information came through a former informant I had cultivated during a wire fraud case in 2019. A man who owed me a favor he had never had to pay until now. Julian was approaching my brother. I read the message twice, then closed the channel and sat at the card table in the Carney apartment and did not move for a long time. Fred was 38 years old, chronically underemployed, serially optimistic, constitutionally incapable of understanding that the house always wins. I had bailed him out twice in the last 6 years, once for $15,000, once for $40,000. The second time I told him it was the last time. He nodded and meant it and then did exactly what people do when they mean something and can't hold it. He kept going. By my most recent count, the debt was somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million spread across 4 different parties, who were not the kind of parties that filed civil lawsuits. Julian had found him. Of course he had. Julian was not careless. He would have mapped every vulnerability in my life, every thread that could be pulled, every door that could be opened, and Fred was the largest, most obvious door. Desperate men are not complicated equations. They are simple ones. I spent 3 nights building the fake key. I want you to understand what I mean when I say it was convincing. I do not mean convincing in the way that a prop is convincing from a distance. I mean technically indistinguishable from the real thing under the specific verification protocols Julian's people would use for exactly 60 days. After 60 days, certain self-executing elements would cause the decryption to fail in a way that would look like corrupted data rather than deliberate sabotage. By the time Julian's technicians understood what had happened, I needed to be finished. I needed 47 days. I had built in 13 days of margin. I did not contact Fred. I did not call him, did not text him, did not show up at his apartment in Queens where he was 3 months behind on rent. I did not warn him. I did not explain. I simply ensured that the fake key was accessible in a location where someone watching Fred would expect a data transfer to occur, structured carefully enough that Fred would believe he had found it through his own channels, that it was genuine, that selling it was a transaction between himself and Julian and no one else. I was not saving my brother. I have to be clear about that. I was not protecting him. I was using the fact of his desperation, the same desperation I had watched build for 15 years, the same desperation I had tried twice to stop and failed as a mechanism. A 60-day delay device in human form. He was 38 years old. I remembered him at 10, afraid of the dark, climbing into my bed at 3 in the morning and falling asleep against my arm without saying a word. That memory did not change what I did. It just made the doing of it heavier. The night I finished the key, I sat looking at the screen for a long time. Fred would sell it. I knew that with the same certainty I knew almost nothing else in my life right now. Not because he was a bad person. Because $2 million and the instinct to survive are stronger than blood ties, and I had spent 18 years learning exactly how much pressure it takes to make that true. I had applied that knowledge to strangers, to acquaintances, to people I had sat across from in interview rooms. For the first time, I was applying it to my brother. And I hated that I was right. 3 weeks after I placed the key, the informant sent a single message: meeting, Queens, Thursday. I parked on the opposite side of the street from a bar in Woodside that Fred had been drinking at for years, a place called Hannigan's with a neon shamrock in the window that had been flickering on and off since at least 2015. I had been to that bar twice in my life, both times to find Fred after he stopped answering his phone. 7:45 in the evening. The street was busy enough that a man sitting alone in a car was invisible. Julian arrived first. He did not go inside. He stood on the sidewalk in a jacket that cost more than a month of my shipyard salary and checked his phone once, then put it away. The practiced patience of a man who has waited for many things and understands that impatience is a form of information you do not give away for free. Fred came around the corner at 7:52. I raised the binoculars. My brother walked, the way he always walked when he was nervous, slightly faster than necessary, shoulders up, chin down, as if he could make himself smaller by trying. He spotted Julian, slowed, then straightened himself with the visible effort of a man performing confidence he does not feel. They shook hands. Julian said something. Fred nodded. Fred reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small drive matte black, unremarkable. He held it out. Julian took it without looking at it and slipped it into his coat pocket in a single smooth motion, the way you accept something you have been expecting and already know the value of. Then Julian produced an envelope. Fred took it, did not open it. He was smarter than that. At least you do not count money on a public sidewalk. Not in that neighborhood. Not at that hour. He put the envelope in his jacket and shook Julian's hand again and said something I couldn't read from this distance. Julian nodded once, turned, walked back to his car without looking back. Fred stood on that sidewalk alone for a moment, and then I watched his shoulders drop. Not a collapse, not a dramatic exhale, just the small involuntary release of a body that has been carrying $2 million worth of tension for long enough that the absence of it registers physically before anything else does. His chin came up slightly. His hands unclenched from the fists I hadn't noticed they were making. He looked like a man who had just been allowed to breathe. I put the binoculars down. I thought about Fred at 10 years old padding into my bedroom in the middle of the night because a thunderstorm had woken him up sliding under the blankets on my side without asking. Falling asleep pressed against my arm with the absolute trust of a child who believes his older brother is sufficient protection against everything the dark might contain. I sat in the car for a long time after he walked away. Julian had the fake key. He did not know it was fake. Fred had $2 million in debt wiped clean with a handshake. He did not know he had sold a weapon that would detonate in his own hand in 60 days. Both of them walked away from that sidewalk believing they had won something. I started the car. Julian had 60 days. I needed 47. I had 13 days of margin, and I intended to use every one of them. I had already started counting, not my regular phone. The secondary line, a number I kept for exactly 2 people, Chloe's school, in case of emergency, and Leo. I had given it to him 2 years ago and told him to use it only if something was wrong. He had never used it. I picked up on the second ring. Leo. Dad. A pause. Brief. The kind of pause a person takes when they've rehearsed what they want to say and are now deciding whether the rehearsal was good enough. I need to see you in person. I can't do this over the phone. I stood very still in the middle of the Carney apartment. What's going on? I know about Meridian Capital. 5 seconds of silence. I counted them. In 18 years of federal work, I had sat across from people who had just said the wrong thing, and I had learned to control my face, my breathing, my voice. I was very good at this. On the phone, it is easier. There is only the voice. I kept mine level. Tell me where you are. West Point. But I'm requesting weekend leave. There's a coffee shop in Newburgh on the waterfront. You'll find it. I already looked up the hours. Another pause. I've been holding on to some information for a while, Dad. I didn't know what to do with it. I think I need to show you. How long? About 2 years. I sat down on the edge of the mattress. 2 years. My son had been sitting on 2 years of information about Meridian Capital alone at a military academy at 18 years old, not knowing whether to use it or bury it, while I had been 40 miles away in a waterfront apartment running a covert investigation on the same subject and working very hard to make sure he would never need to be involved. Are you safe? I asked. Yes. No hesitation. The answer of someone who had already evaluated the question and was confident in the answer. Does anyone at West Point know what you've been looking at? No, I kept it separate. I used the library computers, different terminals each time. He said this with the matter-of-fact practicality of someone who had thought about operational security in exactly the way I would have thought about it, which should not have surprised me as much as it did. Saturday morning, I said. 10 o'clock. I'll find the coffee shop. Okay. And then unexpectedly, Dad, are you all right? I looked around the apartment. The card table. The $40 mattress. The encrypted laptop on the floor with the power cable ran under the door because there was no outlet on that wall. The water stain on the ceiling that I had stopped seeing 3 months ago. I'm getting there, I said. Okay. He accepted this the way a soldier accepts information that is incomplete but sufficient for immediate purposes. Saturday. The line went quiet. I sat on the edge of the mattress for a long time afterward and did not sleep. Not because I was worried, though I was, but because of something else entirely, something I had not felt in a very long time. For the first time in over a year of doing this completely alone, someone who knew the truth was on the other side of it. My son was 20 years old. I had built every layer of this operation specifically to keep him out of it. And somewhere along the way, while I was busy protecting him, he had walked in through a door I didn't know was open, and he had been standing inside for 2 years waiting for me to catch up. The coffee shop in Newburgh was small and quiet and sat on a street that looked directly out at the Hudson River. Early morning light came off the water and landed on everything at a low angle that made even ordinary things look considered. 3 other customers. No one is paying attention to anyone else. Leo was already there when I arrived. He was in civilian clothes, jeans, a gray pullover, but he sat the way West Point had been teaching him to sit for 2 years, back straight, hands on the table, facing the door. He had his father's habit of positioning himself where he could see the entrance without being obvious about it. I noticed that and felt something complicated move through me that I didn't have time to examine. He stood when he saw me, we shook hands, then he seemed to reconsider and pulled me into a brief, firm hug, the hug of someone who wanted to do it and decided not to overthink it. We sat down. He ordered coffee. I ordered coffee. The waitress left. Leo reached into the bag beside his chair and placed a folder on the table between us. Thick, rubber-banded. He had numbered the pages in the top right corner. I could see the numbers through the cover sheet. 47 pages. I found the first thread in my sophomore year, he said. My tuition payment was processed through an intermediary account. It wasn't the school's standard routing. I ran it. He paused. I know how to run things. You taught me to notice when numbers don't line up. I know. It took me about 8 months to connect it to Meridian Capital. Then another 14 to build out what I have. He looked at the folder. It's not as complete as what you have, but it's documented. I looked at my son across a coffee shop table in Newburgh, New York. He was 20 years old. The folder between us. The river through the window behind him. You already knew, he said. It wasn't a question. And for the first time in 400 and something days, for the first time since I had sat in the dark and listened to my wife discuss the timeline of my death, I felt something in my chest that I could not control. Not tears, I did not cry, but something shifted behind my eyes that I had to look away from the window to manage. Yes, I said. How long before you figured it out? He absorbed this, nodded slowly the way he nodded when he was integrating information and deciding what it changed. What do you need from me? I need you to go back to West Point and finish your year and be a student. That's all. That's the most important thing you can do. Leo looked at the 47 pages, a long moment. I can do that. He pushed the folder across the table toward me. But you're keeping this. It belongs in your file, not mine. I picked it up. Hold it. Leo. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say next. I'm sorry you had to carry this. He looked at me steadily. You were carrying something a lot heavier. He finished his coffee. We talked for another 30 minutes about nothing West Point the winter, whether Marcus was a decent guy, what Chloe was reading. The kind of conversation that happens between two people who have just said everything important and are now allowing themselves to breathe. He walked me to my car, shook my hand again. Saturday visits, he said, if I can get leave. Whenever you can. I watched him walk back toward the street. He was 20 years old. Straight back measured. Stride a young man who had sat across from his father with 47 pages of quiet determination and asked for nothing except to be allowed to help carry something. Driving back to Newark, I thought about Leo at 8 years old. A boy who used to panic before math tests, who once called me at midnight convinced he had failed a quiz. That child had become the man in the gray pullover this morning. I had tried to protect him by keeping secrets. He had protected me by finding the truth. Which of us had been right, I genuinely didn't know. October arrived, and Marcus Webb invited me to dinner. This was not unusual. Marcus had a particular philosophy about men who lived alone in small apartments. He believed they needed feeding on a regular basis, the way you believe a plant needs watering, as a simple and non-negotiable fact of maintenance. He had been inviting me to his house in Kearney roughly once a month since March. I had been accepting because the food was good and because Marcus asked questions I didn't have to answer carefully. His foster son Tommy was home for fall break from NYT. I had heard about Tommy for months. Marcus talked about him the way a man talks about something he built that turned out better than he had any right to expect. Proud and slightly bewildered in equal measure. What I was not prepared for was the reality. Tommy Reed in person, 19 years old, 4 inches shorter than Marcus, wearing a sweatshirt from a coding competition I had never heard of, with a laptop open on the kitchen table and a level of focus that suggested the rest of the world was optional. He looked up when I came in, shook my hand, said hey, and went back to his screen. Marcus shrugged at me in a way that communicated everything about their relationship. We ate. Marcus made a chili that had no business being as good as it was. Tommy ate without looking at his plate, which is a skill I have only ever seen in people who have achieved a particular relationship with food, where it exists purely as fuel. We talked about the shipyard, about Marcus's knee, about whether the Nets had any realistic future in the foreseeable universe. After dinner, I sat at the kitchen table with a beer and watched Tommy work. Hey, I said eventually, your network's right, security. Tommy glanced over. Mostly. I've got a thing I've been looking at, an IP address that keeps routing somewhere weird. Probably nothing, might be a misconfigured node somewhere. Do you mind taking a look? He held out his hand without comment. I passed him a piece of paper with the address, one I had been trying to trace for 6 weeks through channels that kept dead-ending in jurisdictions that did not cooperate with informal requests. Tommy looked at it for 2 seconds, then he started typing. Marcus watched me from across the table with the expression of a man who has decided not to ask a question he already knows the answer to. I drank my beer. 40 minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. Tommy ordered himself a coffee from somewhere on his phone, and it appeared at the door 20 minutes later, which he accepted without interrupting what he was doing. At 11:47, he looked up. Okay, that's a relay server. He turned the laptop around. It's bouncing through 4 countries, Netherlands, Estonia, Cyprus, then here. The end node is physically located in a data center in northern New Jersey. He spun the laptop back. What class is this for? Advanced networking, I said. Thanks, Tommy, that's exactly what I needed. Cool. He closed the relay window and opened something else. Conversation over. Marcus looked at me across the table, said nothing, drank his beer. I looked at the address Tommy had written on the corner of the paper, the physical data center location in northern New Jersey. Clean handwriting, entirely casual. He had no idea what he had just done. I folded the paper and put it in my jacket pocket. That address was relay server number 11 in a chain of 12 I had spent 14 months tracing. 1 more remained, and the data center in northern New Jersey was 3 miles from a building I had already identified as a likely candidate 3 weeks ago. I had been right. 3 miles. December came and I bought a small Christmas tree from a lot on the corner of Passaic Avenue, 4 feet tall, $10 leaning slightly to the left in a way that no amount of repositioning would fix. I set it up in the corner of the apartment on the card table and hung 8 ornaments on it, which was the right number for a 4-foot tree that leaned to the left. When Chloe arrived that Friday evening for the holiday weekend, she walked in, looked at the tree, walked around it once and said, "It's tilting." I know. It has character, she decided, and put her bag down. I had wrapped her gifts in paper from the dollar store red with white snowflakes. She had made me a card at school that said "Happy Christmas, Daddy" in green marker with a drawing of what I believed was a dog, though I did not ask for clarification. We ate dinner, we watched part of a movie. At some point she fell asleep on the couch with her head on my arm, which is the kind of thing that makes a grown man sit very still and not move for a long time because the weight of it is something you do not want to disturb. In the morning I gave her the second notebook. Her eyes went to it immediately. The same wire spine graph paper, the same format. She knew what it was before I said anything. "For the game?" she asked. "For the game." She took it carefully, the way she took things she considered serious, and held it for a moment. Then she looked up. "Daddy, I filled the other one." She went to her backpack and came back with the first notebook, set it on the table between us. It was full, I could see from the way the pages sat thick and dense with use. She opened it to the first page and pushed it toward me. "Are they accurate?" I turned the pages slowly. 47 entries. Each one dated in the top right corner in Chloe's careful handwriting. Each one with a small, precise drawing of a face, a neighbor, a man on the street, someone at the school gate. The level of observational detail was striking. She had written notes beside each one. Jacket color, approximate height, which direction they had been walking, what time they had arrived and left. I turned to the 14th page. A man with silver hair drawn from the front standing on a sidewalk in front of a familiar townhouse. The date was from 8 months ago, beside the drawing in Chloe's handwriting. "This man comes to our house a lot. Different times. Sometimes he waits outside. His face looks like he is thinking about something unpleasant. I don't like him." Below that she had written, "He arrived at 6:47 and left at 9:12. He did not ring the bell." I looked at that entry for a long moment. Then I closed the notebook and put it inside my jacket. "You draw very well," I said. "These are very accurate." Chloe nodded, satisfied. She opened the new notebook to the first page, wrote the date at the top in the right corner, and drew a small box for the entry ready. "Can we go to the park today?" she asked, for observing. "Yes," I said, "we can go to the park." That evening, after I drove her home and watched the hallway light come on, I sat in the Kearney apartment and scanned all 47 pages. The file size was small. I uploaded it to the encrypted drive under a subfolder I labeled simply C. An 8-year-old girl's sketchbook graph paper colored markers, careful handwriting with the date always in the top right corner had just become the most important document in my possession. There are investigations that go the way you expect them to go. You identify the network, you trace the money, you build the case layer by layer, each discovery confirming what the previous one implied until the structure is complete and the picture is exactly the shape you anticipated from the beginning. And then there are the other kinds. It was March of the second cover year. I was running a trace on a series of transactions that had been flagged by a pattern recognition algorithm I had built into my own monitoring system. Small amounts. irregular intervals, routing through a chain of accounts I hadn't seen before. Not connected to the Meridian capital structure. Not connected to any of the 12 shell companies I had already mapped. Entirely separate. I spent the first night thinking it was a coincidence. I spent the second night understanding it was not. By the third night, I understood what I was looking at. Julian had a private account structure running in parallel to everything else hidden from Meridian Capital, hidden from the network, hidden from every party he was ostensibly working with. 16 months of small, careful transfers accumulating into a holding position that served exactly one purpose. Julian was preparing to sell the network. All of it. Every shell company, every transaction record, every relationship, every person, including the people who believed they were his partners, including the people who believed they were protected by his loyalty, including Clara. I sat at the card table in the Carney apartment at 2 a.m. and worked through the implications one by one, the way you work through any piece of intelligence that changes the shape of everything you thought you understood. Julian had never been building something with Clara. He had been building something around her, using her access to Meridian Capital's fund structure, her professional credibility, her relationships, accumulating leverage. He intended to convert into a transaction with a buyer who would pay significantly more than the network itself was worth for the information required to dismantle it. The planned execution window 18 months from the date of the oldest private transfer. Clara did not know. I was certain of this, not because I trusted Clara, but because I had spent 2 years learning to read Julian's operational patterns, and the one consistent feature of his approach was that he never shared information with a party he intended to liquidate. Clara was not a partner in Julian's exit. She was a line item in it. I leaned back in the folding chair and looked at the ceiling. My wife had decided that a life built on lies was preferable to a life built on truth. She had brought a foreign operative into our home and our finances and our daughter's orbit. She had watched Julian dissolve medication into my coffee for 14 months. She was not innocent. I was not confused about that. But she had also trusted someone who had been preparing to discard her from the beginning. She had committed her betrayal to a man who had cataloged her usefulness and set an end date for it before she ever believed she had started something real. There is a particular kind of loneliness in being used by the person you chose to use someone else with. I thought about that for a long time. Then I saved the file, closed the laptop, and went to sleep. It did not change what I was doing, but it changed slightly in a way I could not fully articulate how I understood what I was doing it to. Clara thought she was building a future with Julian. She did not know that in his planning documents, she appeared under a column labeled Current Assets, and that column had a disposal timeline attached to it that had been set 6 months ago and was running on schedule. May routine blood draw. I have been going to the clinic on Broad Street every 6 weeks since October. Dr. Renata had a system. I came in. She drew blood. I left. Results in 3 days slipped under the door of the clinic in a sealed envelope with my name Arthur and no last name on the label. We had settled into a rhythm that required very few words and no explanations, which suited both of us. This appointment was different. She did not hand me the envelope at the door. She brought me into the examination room, set the results on the table face up, and sat down across from me in a way that meant she intended to be there when I read them. I read them. She let me finish before she spoke. 14 months of continuous low-dose exposure, she said. The counter agent you've been taking has slowed the accumulation significantly, but there has been a hippocampal impact. Mild, the imaging isn't alarming, but it's measurable. I looked at the numbers on the page. I understood what I was reading. Short-term memory, I said. Primarily. Retrieval speed. The kind of thing that most people wouldn't notice in daily life. She paused. You're not most people. Will it recover? She looked at me steadily over the top of her reading glasses. Partially. Some of the functions will return with time and the right environment. Some of it... She stopped. Started again. Some of it won't fully come back to baseline. I'm telling you this because I think you're the kind of person who needs accurate information more than you need reassurance. I am. Then that's the accurate information. She folded her hands on the table. What I can also tell you is that the dosing has been deliberate, calibrated. Whoever designed this protocol knew exactly what they were targeting and what threshold to stay under to avoid detection. This is not someone who wanted you dead quickly. She held my gaze. This is someone who wanted you diminished, gradually, in a way that looked like stress and age. I nodded. I had known this. Hearing it stated clinically in a small exam room by a woman who had no reason to soften it made it land differently than knowing it abstractly. Are you close to being finished? She asked. Getting there. That's not a number. 3 months, maybe 4. She stood up, which was Dr. Renata's version of accepting an answer she found inadequate, but was willing to work with. She wrote something on a prescription pad, tore it off, handed it to me. Adjusted protocol. Take this in the morning now, not the evening, and sleep. Whatever you're doing at night, do it in 3-hour blocks, not 6. She looked at me. I'm serious about sleep. I know. I'll file an updated record, dated, signed, same folder. She opened the door. Go. I stood up, picked up the results sheet she had already made a copy I knew, and filed it in the Arthur folder with everything else. Thank you, I said. Stop thanking me and start finishing, she said, and went back to her desk. I walked out into the hallway and stopped in front of the small mirror mounted beside the exit, the kind every medical office has, practical and unintentional, that shows you exactly what you look like at the moment you least expect to be seen. I looked at myself for a long time. The welder, the father, the agent. All three were tired in exactly the same way. All three were still standing. The hippocampus damage was real and permanent in ways that would matter later in small and specific moments I could not predict yet, and I had looked at the numbers and accepted what they meant. 3 months, maybe 4. None of the 3 were done. The 12th shell company took 11 days. I want to give you that number without drama. 11 days of work that was unglamorous in the specific way that the final stage of any long investigation is unglamorous. Checking, cross-referencing, verifying, rebuilding the same chain from a different angle to make sure the structure held under examination from every direction. It was painstaking, and it was slow, and it was the most important 11 days of the previous 2 years. On a Tuesday evening in August, the last piece was resolved. The number appeared on the screen. I had gone into this investigation estimating a net worth of $850 million. That estimate had been based on the visible surface of the Meridian capital structure, the portion I could see before I started pulling threads. In the 2 years since I had come to understand that the visible surface was approximately 1/5 of the actual architecture. $4.2 billion, 19 countries, 847 individual transactions fully traced, each one documented with source account, destination account, intermediate relay date amount, and the specific legal violation it constituted. The file ran to 1,063 pages. I sat at the card table in the Kearney apartment and looked at that number for a long time. $4.2 billion was not a financial crime case. $4.2 billion was a geopolitical event. It was enough to collapse 3 mid-sized financial institutions if the transactions were publicly disclosed in the right sequence. It was enough to force the resignation of at least 2 sitting U.S. senators whose names appeared in the documentation. It was enough to constitute one of the largest financial crime cases in the history of the agency I had left 14 months ago in a resignation letter that contained exactly 2 sentences. I could have called that night. I had a secure channel, I had contact, I had the file. Everything was in order, documented, verified, legally admissible, organized in the format that federal prosecutors prefer to receive evidence in because it reduces the time between filing and arraignment. I had thought about this moment for 2 years, and I knew exactly what the call would sound like and exactly what would happen in the 72 hours that followed it. I closed the laptop, turned off the desk lamp, went to bed. I lay in the dark of the Kearney apartment, the washing machine through the wall, the distant sound of a truck on the turnpike extension, the water stain on the ceiling I had stopped noticing 8 months ago, and I did not sleep immediately. I thought about Clara, not about what she had done, not about benzodiazepine, not about the $10 million, not about the conversations I had recorded over 400 nights. I thought about her the way you think about someone you married, the specific, particular way she laughed when something caught her genuinely off guard, which was a laugh she never used deliberately, a laugh she could not perform. I thought about that for a while. The file was complete. The evidence was irrefutable. Every person in the chain had been identified and documented. I could end this tonight. I chose not to. Not because I wasn't ready. Not because I needed more evidence, but because there was still something I was waiting for, and it had nothing to do with the case. I had 14 months left before Clara's window closed, the timeline Julian had set in motion, the one I had been running alongside since the night I first heard it in this same apartment in this same dark. I was going to use those 14 months the way I had used the previous 14. I was going to wait, and I was going to watch, and I was going to see if Clara would choose differently. I already knew she wouldn't, but I gave her the months anyway. Here is what 14 months looks like when you are keeping count. Month 1. Chloe starts 3rd grade. She has strong opinions about her teacher and communicates them through the detective notebook with the clinical precision of a field observer filing a report. The entry reads, Mrs. Patterson arrives 4 minutes late every morning. Her coffee cup is always different. This might be significant. I read it 3 times and feel something I have no name for. Month 3. I visit my mother at the nursing home in Trenton every Sunday. Her memory has been softening for 2 years now. Some days she is fully present. Other days she drifts, calling me by my father's name or by the name of a man I don't recognize. But she always knows me. Even on the difficult days when I walk into the room, she looks up and something in her face settles the way a room settles when you finally find the source of a draft and close it. "You look tired," she says every Sunday. "I'm all right, Mom." "You've been saying that for a year." "I'm getting more all right." She pats my hand. She does not push. She has always known when to ask and when to simply hold. And I've always been grateful for that in a way I have rarely been able to say out loud. Month 6. The fake seizure video. I watched it again on the encrypted drive, 64 seconds shot by Fred, who didn't know what he was filming, edited by Julian's people. I am on the floor of what appears to be the Carney apartment, my body moving in the deliberate, rehearsed way of something designed to be medically convincing. I watch myself perform my own medical emergency. I watched it twice. I understand for the first time that I am not waiting out of patience. I am waiting because Chloe is 8 and then 9, and she is filling detective notebooks with careful drawings and dated entries, and she is not ready for what is coming next. She needs 6 more months of ordinary Sundays and detective games and ice cream on the way home from the park. She needs the transition to happen when she has enough ground under her feet to absorb it without falling. This is not the same thing as love for Clara. I need you to understand the difference. Month 9. Marcus gets a letter from Tommy, who has been nominated for an accelerated track at MIT. Marcus reads it at the shipyard during lunch break, folds it carefully and puts it in his shirt pocket. Does not say a word, just goes back to work. His face does the rest. Month 12. Chloe asks me on a Sunday afternoon while we are walking back from the park whether I am happy. I stop walking. "I think so," I say. She considers this. "What does happy feel like for you?" I look at her, 9 years old, walking beside me with her jacket half zipped and the detective notebook under her arm. "Like this," I say. "This is what it feels like." She nods, apparently satisfied, and keeps walking. Month 14. I am sitting in the Carney apartment at midnight looking at the 1,063-page file on my screen. I understand she is never going to choose differently. I had known this since month 1, but knowing something and accepting something are 2 different processes, and the second one takes longer. I had given her 14 months, not because I thought the outcome would change, but because I needed to be the kind of man who gave it anyway. That was everything love could buy. It was enough. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning in November. I found it in the mailbox, a standard legal envelope from a midtown firm. It took me 40 seconds to trace its ties through 2 shell companies back to Meridian Capital. I stood in the Carney parking lot, breathing the early morning cold, and opened the filing. It was 6 pages of procedural neutrality coding a brutal reality. Clara was filing to reduce my visitation with Chloe to once a month supervised. The grounds lifestyle incompatibility and mental instability. They had attached a declaration from a psychologist I'd never met, and the staged seizure video now rebranded as a medical record. My $19 an hour shipyard wage was listed as proof of my collapse. I folded the letter carefully. Looking out toward the harbor cranes, I realized what Clara and Julian had done. They thought they were finishing me. In reality, they had handed me a gift, a date, a location, and a judge. They had created a formal on-the-record legal proceeding. They had given me the one thing I was missing, a mechanism, a room where every party would be forced to be present while the record was running. I had spent 3 years building the conditions for this explosion. They had just scheduled the detonation for me. I went back inside and made coffee. Sitting at the card table, I mapped the sequence. There were pieces to move a judge, to identify a contact, to activate a timeline, to compress. I needed 48 days. I counted backward from a workable court date, and the numbers aligned perfectly. I picked up my 3rd phone, the line used only once in 2 years. 3 rings. Garrett. "Garrett? It's Dalton. I'm ready. I need a judge. I'll send the parameters." A brief pause. "How long do you need, B? 48 days. "I'll make some calls," Garrett said. Another pause. "Dalton, don't do anything until I confirm the judge." "I know. 48 days. 48 days. I ended the call and looked at the envelope. They had filed this to take my daughter away. Instead, they had handed me the key to their own destruction. The hunt was over. The trial was beginning. The parameters I sent Garrett were 14 lines long. No financial relationship, direct or indirect, with any entity in the Meridian Capital network. No campaign contributions from law firms whose client lists overlapped with the shell company structure I had documented. No social relationships with Senator Hale or any of the 3 other political figures whose names appeared in the file. Former prosecutorial experience at the federal level, preferably financial crime. And this was the one Garrett would have questioned if he asked questions which he did not, a demonstrated pattern of decisions that prioritized evidence over narrative. That last criterion eliminated 6 of the 9 judges on my preliminary list. I spent 2 weeks going through the remaining 3 myself. The first was a good judge, experienced, honest by any reasonable standard, whose brother-in-law had taken a consulting contract from a company 2 steps removed from Meridian Capital 18 months ago. The brother-in-law had no idea. The judge had no idea. But 2 steps is not the same as no steps, and I was not in the business of acceptable risks. The second had donated to Senator Hale's re-election campaign 4 years ago, $85, the kind of donation a person makes when they are handed a form at a dinner and sign it without thinking. But it was a connection, and connections are the things that defense attorneys build appeals on. The third was Eleanor Voss. I read her file over the course of one evening, which was not something I said about many people's files. She had grown up in a coal town in western Pennsylvania, the daughter of a man who had worked underground for 31 years and had the lungs to show for it. She had put herself through community college on a waitressing salary, then through law school on a scholarship she had applied for 17 times before receiving it. Her brother had died in a custody dispute gone wrong, a case that a better-funded lawyer might have won, and she had practiced family law for 6 years before crossing into prosecution, because in an interview she had given to a legal journal in 2008, she said, "I got tired of fixing things after they broke. I wanted to stop them from breaking." She had been on the bench for 23 years. In 23 years, no ruling of hers had been successfully appealed on grounds of bias. No law firm connected to Meridian Capital had ever appeared in her courtroom. No campaign contribution from any entity within 3 degrees of the network I had documented. Her financial disclosure forms, judges in New York file them annually, were so clean they were almost boring. She had been a federal prosecutor for 7 years before the bench. Complex financial fraud primarily. She knew what a federal badge looked like. She knew what it meant when someone who carried one appeared in a proceeding they had not announced themselves in advance. I typed her name into the parameters document and sent it back to Garrett. His response came 4 minutes later, 2 words: "working on it." I leaned back in the folding chair and looked at Eleanor Voss's photograph on the screen. 63 years old, gray hair cut practically, the expression of a person who had heard every version of every story and had developed the specific patience of someone who waits for the truth because they know the truth will eventually require less patience than anything else. In 23 years on the bench, she had never seen a CISATS/SCI badge in her courtroom. In 48 days, she was going to see one. I was very much looking forward to her reaction. The restaurant in Hoboken was the kind of place that had been there for 30 years and would be there for 30 more. Red vinyl booths, a menu that had not changed since approximately 1994, and a corner table near the kitchen that stayed empty on weekday afternoons because of the noise. I had chosen it because the kitchen noise made a directional microphone useless, and because the owner, who had been running the place since his father retired, did not look at anyone who came in with the practiced incuriosity of a man who had decided long ago that his customer's business was not his. Richard Calloway was already in the corner booth when I arrived. He was 61 years old now, retired 18 months, with the particular look of a man who had spent 30 years in federal law enforcement and did not know what to do with his hands when they were not holding a case file. He had a cup of coffee in front of him that he had clearly not been drinking. He watched me cross the room with the same eyes that had watched me from the other side of an interview table a decade ago when he had been assigned to investigate whether I had leaked classified information during an operation in 2014. I had not. He had determined that I had not after 6 weeks of what I can only describe as the most thorough professional examination I had ever been subjected to, including the initial CISA vetting process. He had cleared me. He had written the report himself. He had been the only person in that building who had access to every piece of evidence in that investigation and had come out of it believing without reservation that I was exactly who I said I was. That is the only basis on which I trust anyone completely. They have looked at everything and decided. We shook hands, sat down. He did not offer small talk and I did not offer it back. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and placed the encrypted hard drive on the table between us. It was no larger than a deck of cards. It contained 1,063 pages of documentation, $4.2 billion in fully traced transactions, and evidence sufficient to generate arrest warrants for 27 individuals across 6 countries. He looked at it, did not touch it yet. How long, he asked. 90 days. After that, you transfer the complete file to FBI Financial Crimes. I'll give you the contact names separately. What's the trigger? April 17th, Courtroom 7 Manhattan, 10:15 in the morning. I watched him. You'll know what to do when it starts. He was quiet for a moment. The kitchen made its noise. Someone dropped something metal and it rang against the tile floor. Cal picked up the hard drive and put it in his inside jacket pocket with the same motion he had used 30 years ago to file reports practiced complete final. Does anyone else know this exists? One person who helped compile it. He's clean. Leo. I looked at him. The smallest possible smile moved across his face. The smile of a man who had spent 30 years gathering information and never quite stopped. I keep my ear to things, Dalton, even retired. He's clean, I said again. I know he is. Cal finished his coffee, set the cup down. Don't die before the 17th. I'll try. He stood, buttoned his coat, and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. That was the entire conversation. The legal aid office on Center Street smelled like recycled air and good intentions. Plastic chairs, fluorescent lighting, a reception desk behind a scratched plexiglass window, case files stacked on every horizontal surface in a way that communicated an enormous amount of work being done by an insufficient number of people with an insufficient amount of resources, which was an accurate description of legal aid offices everywhere and always. Miguel Reyes had been practicing for 7 months. He was 25 years old with the look of someone who had finished law school, genuinely believing the law was a tool for making things right, and was now in the process of discovering how much friction there was between that belief and the daily reality of family court in Manhattan. He had my file open on the desk in front of him when I sat down, and he had already read it, which I respected. He looked at the file. He looked at me. He looked at the file again. I have to be honest with you, he said. This case is weak. I know. They have the medical documentation, the income records, the video, 3-character declarations. I know. I've been doing this for 7 months, but I've been in enough hearings to know that walking in there with what we have... He stopped. Tried again. What exactly do you want me to do? I looked at him across the desk. He was trying very hard. I found this admirable in a way that I did not have time to explain. I need you to do one thing, I said. Don't object to anything I say or do in that courtroom. He stared at me. That's it, he said. That's it. You're not... He put his pen down. You're hiding something from me. Yes. A lot. A considerable amount. He sat back in his chair with the expression of a man being asked to drive somewhere without being told the destination and trying to decide whether the driver is trustworthy enough to make that acceptable. If I don't know what's coming, he said carefully, I can't prepare for it, and if something goes wrong, you'll be protected by the fact that you don't know, I said. That's the specific reason I'm not telling you. If this goes the way I expect it to go, you will spend approximately 15 minutes being confused, followed by a very interesting story to tell for the rest of your career. Yeah. And if it doesn't go the way you expect, then you object to everything and we reschedule. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at my jacket, a corduroy blazer I had bought at a Goodwill in Elizabeth for $8 and had not had cleaned because it needed to look exactly as it looked. Are you going to tell me anything useful? He asked. I'll buy you lunch after. Something in his face shifted, not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. He picked up his pen. Okay, don't object to anything you say or do. He wrote it on his legal pad, apparently literally. That's going in my notes. Good. I stood up, shook his hand, and walked out. On the sidewalk, I looked down at my shoes. Same pair I had bought the month I started at the shipyard. The left sole had a crack along the toe that I had been meaning to address for 6 months, and had not because cracked soles were consistent with the cover, and the cover still had 48 days left to run. I needed one more item, a shirt, something that said unambiguously, this man cannot afford better, something that would sit correctly in a courtroom next to a $4,000 suit and communicate everything Clara and Julian expected to see walking through that door. Target sold flannel shirts for $14. I had already checked. 6 weeks before April 17th, I picked Chloe up on a Sunday afternoon for our regular weekend. We went to the park 2 blocks from the apartment, the same park we had been going to for 3 years, with the same bench near the path that caught the afternoon sun, and the same slightly uneven patch of ground near the fence where Chloe liked to practice kicking a ball. The park had become one of the fixed points of those years. Some things you need to stay the same while everything else is moving. Chloe was 10 now. She carried herself differently than she had at 7, more considered, more deliberate, with the particular self-possession of a child who has been paying close attention to the world for long enough that the world has started to make a kind of sense to her. We sat on the bench for a while. She had her jacket zipped all the way up and her hands in her pockets watching a dog across the park negotiate a complicated relationship with a stick. Then she reached into her backpack and put the third notebook on the bench between us. "Full," she said. I picked it up. It was noticeably heavier than the second one had been, which meant she had been writing more. More detail, more observations, more of whatever she had decided was worth recording. I did not open it on the bench. I had learned to read these notebooks in private, slowly, the way evidence should be read. "Daddy?" She was still watching the dog. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." A pause. She was choosing words, which was something she did carefully. "The detective game. Has it been useful?" I turned the notebook over in my hands once. In 3 years, she had filled 3 notebooks with dated, precise, detailed observations of everything she noticed in her daily movements. She had drawn Julian Mercer from memory with enough accuracy that the image was legally usable as a witness identification. She had logged his arrival and departure times with a consistency that would satisfy a federal prosecutor. She had done all of this under the impression that it was a game, or under the impression that I believed it was a game. I was no longer certain these were the same thing. "Very useful," I said. "More useful than you know." She turned to look at me then. Her eyes held mine for a moment with the steady measuring quality I had seen in her since she was very small, the quality that had made me give her the first notebook in the first place because I had recognized it as something I understood. "I think I know," she said quietly. Then, "Daddy doesn't need to explain. I just wanted to make sure it helped." She stood up, smoothed her jacket, and jogged out onto the grass to find her ball. I sat on the bench and watched her. 10 years old, running across a park in March sunlight, chasing a soccer ball, completely at ease in her own body, completely comfortable with having said exactly what she meant and nothing more. I thought about what she had just said. "I think I know." I turned it over the way I turned evidence, looking at it from different angles, testing its weight. A child's intuition. A 10-year-old's instinct that the game was more than a game, or something more specific than that. I opened the notebook to the last page. Yesterday's entry. A drawing careful and deliberate. A small house with a yard, a soccer ball, 2 figures standing near it. Beneath it in Chloe's handwriting, "Daddy in my house." It was not labeled as a current observation. It was labeled as something she expected to happen. I closed the notebook. 42 days. I did not sleep. I lay on the mattress from 11 until 4, not out of anxiety, but because my body refused to waste these final hours on unconsciousness. At 4:53, I got up. I showered and made coffee, my own brand bought from a grocery store on Route 9. Nothing in it but coffee. I drank it while looking out at the parking lot where the sky was that dark blue shade that comes just before it decides to become morning. I went to the closet. The red plaid flannel shirt was exactly where I'd left it. $14 at Target. I had washed it twice to kill the newness because new fabric looks like an affectation, and an affectation was the one thing I couldn't afford today. I put it on with my frayed khaki pants and the shoes with the cracked left sole I had intentionally chosen not to replace. In the bathroom mirror, the man looking back had the hands of a laborer, calloused palms and burn scars from the shipyard torch. He had the posture of someone who had been tired for a long time and had reached an agreement with that tiredness. Wearing a $14 shirt, he looked convincingly like a man with nothing left to protect. For 3 years, they had looked at this man and seen exactly what I wanted them to see. My phone buzzed. A text from Leo, my 20-year-old son, doing exactly what I'd asked him not to do, in position. Green light. I typed back, "Copy. Thank you." I reached for the corduroy jacket on the chair. Inside the pocket was my badge holder, my real CISA credentials laminated with the seal of the Department of Homeland Security. I hadn't held them in 3 years. I pressed them into my inside pocket, feeling the weight settle against my chest. The welder, the father, the agent. All 3, one man, a cheap shirt. "Done," I said to the mirror. The 34-minute drive to Manhattan was silent. I didn't play music. I just drove in that particular stillness that precedes the end of something long. I thought about Chloe sleeping at Clara's house for the last time. I thought about her drawing of the small house and the soccer ball. She had drawn it 42 days ago. In 7 hours, it was going to stop being a drawing. The final battle is about to begin, and the truth will soon be brought to light. Before I reveal the real identity hidden beneath this $14 flannel shirt, please comment with the word "ready" so I know you're here waiting for this confrontation. Just a quick note. This story contains fictionalized elements for educational purposes and may not be entirely real. If you prefer not to listen further, you may choose to exit the video now. I arrived at the courthouse at 8:47. After 6 minutes in the car, I headed to courtroom 7. Miguel was waiting with coffee and the look of a man who had accepted that he would not understand today's events but would do his job anyway. The courtroom was standard fluorescent lights, wooden furniture, and the sterile smell of institutional cleaning products. I noticed 3 reporters in the back and Julian in the third row. He wore the same jacket from the Tribeca sidewalk 3 years ago, looking like a supportive friend. Clara arrived at 9:26 in an Armani suit that cost more than my monthly shipyard salary. Her attorney, Gerald Miller, moved with the practiced theater of a man who had already won. He looked at me, confirming that I was exactly the broken man his file described. Judge Voss entered at 9:31. We stood, we sat, and the record began. Miller was good. In 40 minutes, he built a devastating case. He used my $19 an hour pay stubs, the lease for my tiny apartment, and medical reports from doctors who had never met me. Finally, he projected the 64-second seizure video onto the screen. The room went quiet. It was the silence of an audience watching something they believed they understood. I watched the video of myself on the floor, keeping my face still and my hands flat on the table. Miller set the remote down and looked at the judge, his arrangement complete. I looked at Julian. There was a small, controlled smile at the corner of his mouth, the smile of a professional who believes his plan is flawless. He had been planning this for 4 years. He didn't know that the smile on his face was the last freely chosen thing he would do for the next 35 years. Miller finished his presentation and sat down. Judge Voss made a note. She wrote slowly, which was a characteristic I had identified in my research. She wrote down what she actually thought, not summaries, which meant she was genuinely processing rather than performing attentiveness. I watched her pen move and felt something that was close to confidence, but was actually something quieter than that, the recognition that the right person was in the right chair. "Ms. Dalton," Judge Voss said without looking up from her notes, "you've indicated you'd like to make a personal statement." "Yes, Your Honor." Clara stood. She looked at the judge, first brief respectful. Then she turned and looked directly at me. It was the first time she had looked at me since entering the courtroom. I had wondered arriving this morning whether she would be able to meet my eyes. She could. I noted this about her the way I noted everything. She was not someone who looked away from things. Whatever else she was not a coward. She spoke for 11 minutes. "I will not give you the full text, because the full text was a precisely engineered document, and some things do not deserve the space of full quotation. What I will tell you is that it had been written with care, probably with Miller's input, possibly with Julian's, and it did what it was designed to do. It described a man who had, in her words, chosen failure, who had walked away from a career, from stability, from every reasonable obligation of a father and a partner, in favor of a life she characterized as a kind of extended collapse. A man who had taken a medical episode, her word for the seizure video, and hidden it from everyone, including from the child who depended on him. She talked about the 3 a.m. calls she had taken from Chloe asking why Daddy's new apartment was so small. She talked about working 18-hour days to give her daughter stability while her husband welded steel for $19 an hour by choice. Her voice broke at the 9-minute mark. Not a collapse. A single catch in the throat, controlled and immediately recovered, the kind of break that reads to an observer as genuine emotion being managed by a composed person, which is the most convincing kind of emotional display there is. The 3 reporters in the back row leaned forward slightly, almost in unison. I looked straight ahead. My hands were flat on the table. I thought about the $14 shirt against my chest and the badge in my inside pocket, and the 47 pages of a 10-year-old girl's careful handwriting, sitting in an encrypted drive that was at this precise moment being reviewed by 3 FBI analysts who had received it from Richard Calloway at 9 o'clock this morning. I thought about Chloe asking what happy felt like and me saying this is what it feels like walking beside her in the park. Clara sat down. Miller placed one hand briefly on her shoulder, a gesture of the kind that is performed for audiences as much as for the person receiving it. Judge Voss set her pen down. She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. The look of someone who has heard every version of every story and is now inviting the version she has not heard yet. "Mr. Dalton," she said, "do you have anything to say?" I looked at her. Here we go. Right now, the secret ace hidden behind this $14 flannel shirt is about to be revealed to wipe out the entire criminal network. If you've been waiting for this shocking exposure, comment the word "ready" so I know you're still with me. But please be advised, the upcoming events contain fictional elements and may leave you stunned. If you'd rather not continue, you may choose to exit the video now. "No, Your Honor," I said. "Not yet." The courtroom was quiet for a half second. Then Miller laughed. It was a small sound, involuntary, quickly controlled the laugh of a man who had decided the response was so absurd that containing his amusement was more effort than it was worth. He covered it with a hand and looked down at his notes. Judge Voss looked at Miller. She did not say anything. She simply looked at him over the top of her reading glasses for a period of approximately 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, Gerald Miller's expression moved from amusement to something considerably more careful. She turned back to me. "For the record, Mr. Dalton," she said in the measured, unhurried voice of someone who has been waiting without impatience for something she has not yet seen, "would you please state your full legal name?" I placed both hands flat on the table in front of me. The courtroom was quiet. The reporter's fingers were still above her keyboard. In my peripheral vision, I could see Miguel sitting very still to my left, doing exactly what I had asked him to do, nothing. With my right hand, I reached into my inside jacket pocket. I placed the badge holder on the table. I opened it with my thumb and positioned it facing Judge Voss, and I held it there for 3 seconds without speaking. 1, 2, 3. The courtroom was the quietest I had ever heard a room be. Judge Voss looked down at the badge. I watched her eyes move across it, the photograph, the seal, the text, the clearance designation in the particular way that a person reads something they are not certain they are reading correctly, and so reads it again to be sure. She looked up. Her face did not change. This was the thing about Eleanor Voss that I had understood from her file and confirmed in the last 30 minutes of watching her. She did not perform reactions. Whatever she felt in that moment, and she was human, she felt something, she kept it in the place where experienced judges keep things that belong to them and not to the record. She held my eyes. I held hers. And then, in the same measured, unhurried voice, the voice she used for everything, for rulings and for procedure and for the ordinary business of the court, she read, "Arthur James Dalton." A pause. The pause of someone allowing a room to understand what is about to change. Previously known professionally as Supervisory Special Agent Arthur Dalton, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency Special Operations Division. Security clearance, top secret, sensitive, compartmented information. The 3 reporters in the back row were not writing. They were recording. Miller had stopped looking at his notes. Clara had gone very still. Julian in the 3rd row was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, the expression of a man who has just understood something he cannot yet fully process and whose body has registered it before his mind has caught up. I closed the badge holder, set it on the table in front of me, placed both hands flat beside it. "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. Judge Voss straightened in her chair. She looked once at Miller, once at Clara, once at Julian. The swift, complete survey of someone confirming the dimensions of a room before deciding what to do with it. Then she looked at me, and she gave the smallest possible nod. The side door opened. 4 federal marshals. They came through the side door in pairs, 2 moving left toward the plaintiff's table, 2 moving right toward the public seating. Their movements were coordinated with the particular efficiency that comes from rehearsal from people who have done this before and understand that the only thing worse than a public arrest is a slow one. Everything that happened next took approximately 90 seconds. I know this because I counted. The first pair reached Julian in the 3rd row before he had time to stand. He was cuffed, standing, which was what he chose. He stood as they approached, which I noted because it was the one decision in that room he made for himself that morning. He did not speak. He did not look at Clara. He looked at me. And for the first time in 3 years of watching him through binoculars, through database photographs, through security footage and financial records, for the first time, the thing behind his eyes was not calculation. It was something else. I did not have a name for it. The second pair reached Clara. She did not stand immediately. She sat for 1 full second. I counted that too, with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the table in front of her. Miller had moved back from her, which was an instinct I understood. When the structure changes this fast, you recalibrate your proximity. Then she stood, and she looked at me. Across the courtroom. Across 3 years and 1,500 days and a $14 flannel shirt and a badge on a table, and everything that had accumulated between us since a DC charity event in the spring, when I had looked across a room and thought, this woman is interesting. 3 seconds. She said very quietly, so quietly I was not certain the court reporter caught it. "You were never broken, were you?" It was not a question. I did not answer it. There was no answer that would have added anything to what she already understood. Her face did not collapse immediately. That was the part that stayed with me. She held the expression for 1 more second. The expression of a woman processing a truth she had perhaps suspected longer than she had admitted to herself. And then it changed. Not dramatically, just changed. The way a room changes when someone finally turns on a light that has been off for a long time. She turned away from me. They led her toward the door. She did not look back. Simultaneously, I knew this from the briefings that would come later from Cal's report filed 3 days afterward. Richard Harlow, CFO of Meridian Capital, was being arrested in a board meeting on the 42nd floor of a midtown building while his colleagues watched across a conference table. 2 cartel-adjacent financial partners were being detained by customs agents at JFK at Gate 31 mid-boarding. And in the Russell Senate office building in Washington, 3 FBI agents were knocking on the door of Senator Hale's office. Miller stood at the plaintiff's table with both hands at his sides and said nothing. His hands were not entirely steady. Miguel to my left said nothing either. He sat very still and stared at the front of the room with the expression of someone experiencing for the first time the gap between what law school prepares you for and what actually happens. The 3 reporters in the back row were not writing anymore. They were filming. I sat in the $14 flannel shirt and looked at the courtroom as it went quiet around me. The particular quiet of a space where something enormous has just finished moving through it, leaving everything rearranged. There was one more thing to do. The courtroom had emptied of everything except what mattered. The marshals were gone. The reporters were gone, moving fast with the purposeful energy of people who understand that they are holding something significant and need to be the first ones to put it somewhere. Miller had left. I did not see him go, but the plaintiff's table was empty and his briefcase was not beside it. The clerk was at her desk, very still, looking at a point on the far wall with the expression of a woman who has processed an enormous amount of information and is waiting for her nervous system to catch up. The court reporter had stopped typing. What remained was Judge Voss on the bench, Miguel to my left in a state of profound speechlessness, and me. Judge Voss looked at me for a long time. I had sat across from many people in many rooms over 18 years, and I had learned to read silences the way other people read text. This one had a quality I recognized but rarely encountered, the silence of someone who has just seen something they had not expected to see and is taking the time to be properly present with it rather than moving past it too quickly. She picked up her pen, made a notation in the file. Set the pen down. Mr. Dalton, she said, given the circumstances now on the record, specifically the existing arrest warrant for attempted murder and the confirmed presence of an armed foreign national operating under a covert identity within your daughter's primary residence, I am issuing a temporary emergency custody order effective immediately. She signed the document the clerk slid to the bench. You may collect your daughter within 24 hours. The order is self-executing. Present it to any law enforcement officer if needed. She looked up. Do you have any questions? No, Your Honor. I stood. Thank you. She looked at me for a moment with something that was not quite a smile but was in the same neighborhood. Mr. Dalton, she glanced down at the flannel shirt, then back up. Get your daughter. A pause. And the next time you appear in my courtroom, her eyes moved briefly and deliberately to the $14 plaid flannel. Wear whatever you want. I held her gaze for 1 second. Yes, Your Honor. I picked up the badge holder from the table, put it back in my inside pocket, and walked toward the door. Miguel caught up with me in the hallway, moving quickly, slightly out of breath, the walk of a person who has been sitting absolutely still for 45 minutes and has just remembered that his legs work. Okay, he said. Can you explain any of that to me? Any of it, one thing, after I pick up my daughter. You said you'd buy me lunch. I did. I will. I kept walking. I owe you a meal and an explanation, in that order. He was quiet for 3 steps, then, was that where you always? Yes. He processed this. And then, for no reason that I could identify, and for every reason that made complete sense given what he had just been present for, Miguel Reyes started laughing. Not a polite laugh. A genuine one, slightly disbelieving, slightly delighted, the laugh of a 25-year-old who had just lived through something that his 7 months of practice had absolutely not prepared him for, and who had decided in the absence of any other appropriate response that laughter was the most honest one available. I did not laugh with him, but I did not stop him either. We walked out of the courthouse together into the April morning, him laughing, me thinking about Chloe, and somewhere behind us, courtroom 7 settling back into the silence of a room where something enormous had just finished. The FBI briefing was held on the 23rd floor on Broadway 3 hours after the arrests. Cal was there waiting with the patient expression of a man used to the shadows. Agent Carver set a folder before me. Julian Mercer is an operational identity established 15 years ago, she said. He was trained by an Eastern European intelligence service and inserted into the U.S. financial system in 2009. I read the summary. Then she turned to the second page, the reason he had targeted me. Julian had audited every CISA agent capable of threatening his network. He cross-referenced financial records, personal histories, and vulnerabilities. Most agents had leveraged debt, political ties, or personal secrets. I had none. No debt, no political connections, no compromising relationships. In clinical terms, I was operationally uncompromisable through standard methods. Because he couldn't buy me or break me, he chose the only remaining path: internal destruction through my family. I closed the folder. Cal watched me from across the table. "That's a compliment," he said, in the most brutal way possible. I thought about 18 years of discipline. I had lived without the connections most people have, not for austerity, but to be effective. That lack of leverage made me dangerous enough to be targeted, yet easy to isolate in a tiny apartment for 1,000 days. He had chosen me because of exactly what I was. It was the most professionally affirming and personally devastating thing I had ever heard. "He made one mistake," I said, pushing the folder back to Carver. "He assumed the family angle had no counterplay. It does. It just takes longer." I left the federal building at 2:47 and drove to Chloe's school. The emergency custody order was in my jacket pocket, the inside one the same pocket that had held the badge this morning. I had folded it carefully along the clerk's crease and put it there when Judge Voss's clerk handed it to me, and I had not taken it out since because I did not anticipate needing to show it to anyone. Schools, in my experience, do not require federal agents to present orders twice. They require it once and then they move efficiently, which is what happened. The school was a brick building on a side street in the upper 70s, the same school Chloe had been attending since kindergarten, with the same painted mural on the exterior wall and the same iron gate across the front entrance. I had dropped her off here on my custody mornings for 3 years. I knew the security guard's name. He looked at the order, looked at me, said, "Wait here," and came back 4 minutes later with Chloe. She came through the door with her backpack on and her jacket half zipped and the current detective notebook under her arm. The fourth one, 3 months into it, not yet full, and she stopped when she saw me standing at the gate. She looked at me. She looked at the notebook under her arm. She looked back at me. "Daddy," she said, "does this mean our detective game is over?" I looked at my daughter, 10 years old, standing in the afternoon sunlight on a sidewalk in Manhattan with a notebook she had been filling for 3 years in a story she had understood for longer than I had allowed myself to believe. "Yeah, sweetheart," I said. "Game over." 1 second of silence. "Good," she said. I was running out of pages anyway. I knelt down on the sidewalk and I held my daughter. She put both arms around my neck and held on the way. She had held on when she was small and frightened, and the way she held on now, which was different. The hold of someone who is not frightened, but who has been patient for a very long time and is finally allowing themselves to not be patient anymore. I held her for a long time. She did not ask about her mother. She did not ask what had happened that day or what came next or where they were going now. She seemed to understand in the way that Chloe understood most things, that some questions belonged to later, and that what belonged to right now was this: the sidewalk, the afternoon light, her father's arms. We walked to the car. I put her backpack in the back seat. We pulled into traffic. For 10 minutes, neither of us said anything. Then Chloe said, without looking up from the window, "Daddy, can we stop somewhere? I'm really hungry." I looked at her in the mirror, this 10-year-old person who had carried more than I had given her credit for, who had drawn 47 faces and logged 47 dates and written "Daddy in my house" in the last page of a notebook and handed it to me 6 weeks ago with the calm of someone who already knew the ending. "What do you want?" I said. "Ice cream." I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed all day, possibly the first time in longer than I wanted to calculate, and it came out of me the way things come out when you have been holding them for a long time, and something small and perfect finally opens the door. "Ice cream it is," I said. We stopped at a place on Lexington Avenue. She ordered 2 scoops of mint chocolate chip and ate methodically, looking out the window at the city going past, asking no further questions. I watched her and thought this: not the file, not the badge, not the 90 seconds in courtroom 7. This, a 10-year-old eating ice cream in an afternoon, was what 1,500 days had been protecting. We drove back to Kearney. I stopped at a Target on the way, not for a flannel shirt this time, and bought an inflatable mattress, 2 sets of sheets, a pillow, and a stuffed animal from the end-of-aisle display that Chloe identified as a rabbit and declared acceptable. She carried it out of the store under her arm with the gravity of someone making a considered acquisition. By 9 o'clock she was asleep. She had asked once in the car outside Target, "Are we staying at your apartment?" "For now," I said. "We're going to find a house soon." "With a yard?" "With a yard." She nodded and got out of the car. She fell asleep 20 minutes after I set up the inflatable mattress in the bedroom, the one room in the apartment that had a door which I gave to her and which she accepted without comment, which was Chloe's way of registering gratitude for things she considered obvious. I sat on the floor beside her until her breathing slowed and evened out, and she was fully, completely, unreservedly asleep the way children sleep when they feel safe. Then I went out to the main room and sat in the dark. The washing machine through the wall, the distant turnpike hum, the water stain on the ceiling that I had stopped seeing months ago and was only now in this particular stillness seeing again. I looked around the apartment. The encrypted laptop was off. I had not opened it since the morning. The external hard drive was gone, transferred to Cal, transferred to the FBI, now in a chain of custody that no longer required my participation. The card table still had the same folding chair pushed against it. The window still faced the same brick wall 6 feet away. The tilt in the living room floor that I had never reported to the landlord because reporting it would have required a conversation I didn't have time for. It was just an apartment. For 1,500 days it had been something else. A surveillance hub, an analysis center, a place where I had sat in the dark, mapping the destruction of a network, while a washing machine made noise through the wall and a 10-year-old girl made detective drawings 40 miles away. And now with a stuffed rabbit on the floor of the bedroom and a child asleep on an inflatable mattress, it was just an apartment again. I pressed my hand flat against my chest. My heart was beating, steady, even. I had thought about this moment not often because thinking too far ahead is a discipline failure, but occasionally on the worst nights, when the laptop screen had gone blurry and the counter agent hadn't fully masked whatever the morning coffee had carried. I had thought, if I get there, what will it feel like? It felt like the washing machine through the wall. It felt like a small room with a child sleeping and nowhere else I needed to be. It felt like setting down something very heavy after carrying it for so long that you had forgotten what your hands felt like without it. I sat in that chair for a long time. Tomorrow I needed to find a house. 3 bedrooms, one for me, one for Chloe, one for Leo, when he was able to visit. A yard. The yard was non-negotiable. I had promised a yard to a drawing in a notebook, and I intended to deliver it. And sometime in the next 48 hours, I needed to have a conversation with Chloe about the things she already knew and had chosen for 3 years not to tell me she knew. I was not sure yet exactly how that conversation would go. But I was here, she was here, the heart was beating. That was enough for tonight. 3 months is not a long time. It is long enough for the legal system to move through arraignment, discovery, and preliminary hearings. It is long enough for the FBI to complete the foundational work on a $4.2 billion financial fraud case across 19 countries. It is long enough for the news cycle to absorb something extraordinary and begin in its way to metabolize it. Julian's sentencing was first. 35 years federal, no possibility of parole for 22. The judge in that proceeding read the sentence in the same measured voice that judges use for all sentences, large and small, because the sentence is not the performance, the evidence is the performance, and that work had already been done. I was not in the courtroom. I read the report Cal sent me at 6 in the morning, 2 sentences, no commentary. Clara accepted a plea agreement. 12 years reduced to 10 with full cooperation on the Meridian Capital Network. The cooperation turned out to be significant. She knew more than Julian had believed she knew, which was a pattern I recognized. People consistently underestimate what the people around them have understood. Her sentencing was on a Wednesday afternoon. Fred attended. I did not. Fred received a suspended sentence and 5 years of supervised probation. He had cooperated fully from the moment his attorney explained the alternative. He had not known the data key was fake. He had not known what the seizure video was for. He had known at some level that what he was doing was wrong, which is a different thing from knowing the specific wrong, and the court had treated that distinction accordingly. Miller lost his license to practice law in the state of New York pending a bar investigation. 3 FBI agents were assigned to his financial records. His name appeared in the documentation of Meridian Capital's legal structure in ways that his attorney was going to spend the next several years attempting to explain. Senator Hale resigned on the same morning Julian's sentencing was announced. The resignation letter cited health reasons. His office did not respond to follow-up questions. $4.2 billion remained frozen across 19 jurisdictions, while the recovery process worked through the structure I had mapped. 3 banks were under formal investigation. I learned all of this the way you learn the aftermath of something you have lived inside for a long time, as information that confirms what you already knew was true, arriving in a sequence that feels both inevitable and somehow slower than it should. The appointment with Dr. Renata was on a Tuesday in July. She had the results on her desk when I came in. She did not make me wait. "Stable," she said. "The hippocampus has not deteriorated further since you stopped the exposure. The counteragent did its job." She looked at the imaging on her screen. but the area affected during the active poisoning period, the retrieval function, the short-term encoding, won't return to its previous baseline. She looked at me over her glasses. I want to be clear about what that means in practice. You'll notice it in specific circumstances. You'll adapt. But the previous baseline is not recoverable. I know, I said. You knew before I told you. Yes. She put the folder down, looked at me directly the way she had looked at me the very first time I sat in that plastic chair in this room. Any regrets? I thought about that. Actually thought about it rather than answering reflexively. No, I said. She nodded. Once. The nod of someone who had expected this answer and had asked anyway because the question deserved to be asked. Don't come back with the same problem, she said. I won't. I walked out of the clinic into the July sun and stood on the sidewalk for a moment with my face tilted up toward the light. Short-term memory not fully recoverable. I had known that since May of the second cover year when she had first told me the damage was accumulating. I had continued anyway. I would continue again in the same circumstances with the same information, making the same choice. Some costs you pay knowingly. Those are the only ones worth paying. I was not in the courtroom when Clara entered her plea. I want to be clear about that. I chose not to be there. It was not a logistical conflict or an oversight. It was a decision that whatever happened in that room between Clara and the record belonged to her, and my presence would have changed it into something else, something smaller. Cal attended. He called me that evening and told me what happened. The courtroom was nearly empty. A Wednesday afternoon, no press permitted the media arrangement that had been part of the plea negotiation, the one concession Clara's attorney had insisted on that the prosecution had agreed to. The judge, the prosecutor, Clara and her attorney, a court reporter, a bailiff. Cal seated at the back as an interested federal party. The prosecutor walked through the charges, the financial crimes, the conspiracy, the attempted murder charge that the benzodiazepine evidence and Dr. Renata's dated records had made sustainable. Clara entered the plea on all counts. She said guilty to each one in a clear, even voice that Cal described as controlled but not performative. The voice of someone who had made a decision and was carrying through it. At the end of the proceeding, the judge asked if she wished to make a statement. Clara stood. The courtroom was by that point a room in which there was almost no one. No gallery of observers, no reporters recording, just the institutional hum of a room that had heard everything and remembered nothing. She did not address the court. I want my daughter to know that I love her, she said, and that the worst thing I ever did was let her grow up in a house full of lies while believing it was a house full of love. She paused. I'm sorry, Chloe. Not to this court, to you. Cal said her voice did not break at any point. Her eyes were wet. That was the only thing. She sat down. The judge recorded the statement. The sentence 12 years reducible to 10 with continued cooperation was formalized and signed. Cal called me from the sidewalk outside the building. She read Julian's file, he said, the one showing he was planning to sell her position in the network. She read it in discovery and requested a meeting with the prosecutor the next morning. I know, I said. I had known this was likely. She told the prosecutor that Arthur Dalton had accidentally saved her life. A pause. She used those words. Accidentally saved. I was quiet for a moment. I thought about what it must have been like to read a planning document that assigned a disposal timeline to your name in a file prepared by the man you had trusted, the man you had chosen over everything else, the man you had believed was building something with you when he was actually building something around you. I thought about the first year of our marriage, the DC charity event and the 2 hours we had talked and the way she had looked at me when she finally laughed, the real laugh, not the performed one. She had been a good person then, or had at least been closer to one. I did not know when it had changed. I was not certain she knew either. She's enrolled in an accounting course at the prison education program, Cal added before he hung up. Started last week. I looked at that information for a long moment. Good, I said. And I meant it not because it changed anything between us, not because accounting classes in a federal prison constituted anything like resolution, but because choosing something that was genuinely useful for herself, in the circumstances she had created for herself, that was a kind of beginning. Even beginnings that start in the wrong direction eventually have to find their way. The formal custody process took 6 months. I want to explain why, because the timeline matters in the United States. A temporary emergency custody order, which is what Judge Voss had issued on April 17th, is precisely what its name says. It is temporary. It is a bridge, not a destination. Establishing permanent physical custody requires a separate proceeding, and that proceeding has its own sequence, its own timeline, its own requirements. I did not mind. I had learned over 3 years how to wait for the right process to complete. The first hearing was in March, 3 months after the emergency order. Family court, a different judge from Voss. The proceeding was procedurally straightforward. Clara was remanded pending sentencing on her criminal charges, which eliminated her from consideration. Clara's parents had been assessed and eliminated her father's file, the one that had appeared twice in CISA's peripheral database all those years ago, turned out to be the beginning of a much longer document, and family court did not look favorably on grandparents with cartel-adjacent financial relationships. I had stable housing. I had found the house in New Jersey 3 days after Day D. 3 bedrooms, a yard, exactly as specified, and documented income through a consulting arrangement I had negotiated with a private firm that understood the value of someone with my background and clearance history. Primary physical custody was granted on a Thursday afternoon. I texted Leo from the parking lot outside the courthouse. 1 word, done. He replied in 4 seconds, told you. The second layer came in June. Judge Reyes, the family court judge assigned to finalize the long-term arrangement, had a practice I had read about in his case history and respected for children over 8. He requested a private meeting. Not with the attorneys, not with the parents, with the child. He met with Chloe in his chambers on a Wednesday morning. I waited in the hallway on a wooden bench for 47 minutes. I counted. When the door opened, Chloe came out first. She walked past me, sat down on the bench beside me, and looked at the opposite wall with the expression she used when she was thinking about something and had decided the thinking was finished. The clerk came to the door. "Mr. Dalton, the judge would like a word." I went in. Judge Reyes was a compact man in his 50s with reading glasses similar to Voss's and the patient manner of someone who spent most of his professional life listening to things that mattered to the people saying them. He was holding a piece of paper. I recognized it before he turned it around. A photocopy slightly reduced of the last page of Chloe's 3rd detective notebook. The small house, the yard, the soccer ball, 2 figures, the handwriting beneath Daddy and my house. "She brought this in herself," he said. When I asked her who she wanted to live with, she opened her notebook to this page and put it on the desk. He set it down. She said, and I'm quoting, "I want to live here." And then she looked at me and said, "It's already drawn." He looked at me for a moment. "I don't need anything else from either party," he said. "I'll have the order ready by Friday." I drove Chloe home that afternoon, home being the 3-bedroom house in New Jersey with the yard that had by now acquired a soccer ball and a garden hose and a patio chair I had bought at a hardware store and had not yet assembled. She looked out the window at New Jersey going by. "Daddy, when can we visit, Mom?" "Whenever you want." "Next month." "Yes." She nodded, kept looking out the window. The following month, I drove her to the facility and parked in the visitor's lot and waited for 2 hours while she went in. I did not go inside. I did not ask what they talked about when she came back out because it was not mine to ask. I drove her home and made dinner, and she told me about a book she was reading at school, and that was the afternoon. Every month after that, it was the same. That was between the 2 of them. 6 months after April 17th, on a Saturday afternoon in October, I was sitting in the backyard watching Chloe kick a soccer ball. This was not an unusual activity. We had established a rhythm in the new house that was in the way that rhythms in new houses tend to be both deliberate and ordinary. Dinner at 6, homework at the kitchen table, soccer in the backyard on weekends, which Chloe practiced with the same focused intensity she had applied to the detective notebooks, methodically, seriously measuring her own improvement against a standard only she fully understood. She was good. Better than I had expected, though I was not sure why I had expected anything other than thoroughness. I was in the patio chair, the one I had finally assembled 3 months after buying it with a cup of coffee, and nothing in particular requiring my attention, which was itself a condition so unfamiliar that I was still 6 months in, not entirely certain how to inhabit it. Chloe stopped kicking. She jogged over and sat down on the grass beside my chair cross-legged and put the notebook, the 4th one nearly full now, on her lap. She looked at it for a moment, then she looked up at me. "Daddy, can I tell you something?" "Of course." She looked back at the notebook. "I knew it wasn't a game," she said, "for a long time." I set my coffee down. "How long?" I asked. I kept my voice even. I had been keeping my voice even for a long time, and I was very good at it. But there was something different about doing it now, not to conceal something operational, but to give my daughter the space to say what she had clearly been deciding whether to say for months. "Since the second notebook." She turned it over in her hands, not opening it, just holding it. "When I realized you were scanning all the pages, you'd scan them and upload them somewhere." She glanced up. "I could tell by the way you handled them. Real detective games don't work like that. You were too careful with them." A 10-year-old had identified the change in my handling of the notebooks as operationally significant. I did not say anything. "I didn't tell you," she continued, "because I could see that you didn't want me to know. And I thought—" She paused, working through it with the precision she brought to everything. I thought if I told you I knew, then you'd worry about me. And you already had a lot to worry about. So I just kept doing it the same way. She looked up at me. Was that okay? I looked at my daughter, 10 years old, sitting cross-legged on the grass in the backyard of a house that had a yard specifically because she had drawn it into existence 6 weeks before I delivered it. She had known for 18 months that the game was real. She had continued playing it carefully, accurately, with the dated entries and the precise drawings, while simultaneously pretending not to know so that I would not worry about the fact that she knew. She had been protecting me, while I was protecting her. The same way, at the same time, without telling each other. I did not trust my voice for a moment. Yeah, I said finally. That was okay, Chloe. That was more than okay. She nodded the satisfied, considered nod of someone whose logic has been confirmed. Then she stood up, smoothed her jacket, and jogged back out to the soccer ball. Daddy, watch this. She kicked it cleanly across the yard, and it hit the fence post on the far side with a sound like a small bell. I sat in the patio chair in the October afternoon and watched her. We had been protecting each other, both of us, for 3 years, without saying a word to each other about it. And the entire time, neither of us had been alone. I had not understood that until right now. 2 years after April 17th, Chloe asked me to come inside with her. Every month for 2 years, I had driven her to the facility and parked in the visitor's lot and waited. I had read books in the car. I had eaten lunches from a thermos. I had watched other people come and go from the entrance, some purposeful, some reluctant, some with the fixed expressions of people who had made peace with a particular obligation and were carrying through it. I had never gone in. Chloe came out to this parking lot on this particular Sunday and said simply, "Daddy, come in this time, just this once." I looked at her. She was 12 now. She carried herself the way 12-year-olds who have seen more than their age carries, not old exactly, but settled in a way that had nothing to do with loss and everything to do with understanding. Okay, I said. The visiting room was small and fluorescent lit with plastic chairs and a table bolted to the floor, and a window in the door through which a guard moved past at regular intervals. Clara was already seated when we came in. She looked at Chloe first the way she always did, and something in her face changed in the specific way it always changed when Chloe came in, a softening that was entirely genuine and entirely separate from everything else she was. Chloe sat across from her mother. They looked at each other for a moment. Then Chloe said with the matter-of-fact directness that was her most reliable characteristic, "Mom, Daddy came too." Clara looked at me. I was standing by the door, not sitting, not performing ease I didn't feel. We held each other's eyes for a long moment. Chloe seemed to understand that this was a conversation that needed to happen without her as the audience. "I'm going to get water," she said, and stood and went to the corridor water fountain which was visible through the door. Clara looked at her hands on the table. Then she looked at me. "Did you ever actually love me?" she asked. Her voice was even. She was not performing the question, she was asking it the way someone asks a question they have been sitting with for 2 years and have decided they need an answer to, regardless of what the answer is. "Yes," I said. She looked at me. "Then why?" "I waited 14 extra months after I had everything I needed," I said. "The file was complete in August of the second year. I could have moved in August, I didn't." I looked at her directly. "I gave you 14 months to choose something different. That's not what you do with a case file. That's what you do with someone you loved." She was quiet for a long moment. 14 months, she said softly. Not a question. Working it out. "It was the most expensive thing I've ever done," I said. "And I'd do it again." She looked at the table. I could not read her expression, not because it was hidden, but because it contained too many things simultaneously for any one of them to be legible separately. I stood. At the door I stopped. "The accounting program," I said. "Keep going, not for the parole board, for yourself." She did not answer, but she looked up. I went out into the corridor. Chloe was waiting, cup of water in hand, leaning against the wall with the patient posture of someone who had given 2 people the time they needed. "Okay," she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Okay." We drove home in silence, the good kind of silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. Chloe looked out the window at New Jersey going past. I drove. Nobody said anything more. There was nothing more that needed to be said. Cal came to the house on a Saturday in April, exactly 1 year after the courtroom. He wasn't someone who chose dates by accident. We sat in the backyard drinking beer in the companionable silence of 2 people who had survived something significant. We watched Chloe practice soccer, her movements focused and methodical. "CISA came back to you," Cal said eventually. "Yes?" "You said no." "Yes." He didn't judge. He knew why I'd trusted him with the drive. "What are you doing instead?" "Consulting for a private firm. 3 or 4 days a week," I said. "The work is sustainable. But more importantly, I'm home for dinner every night. That's the only metric I care about now." He nodded, looking toward the fence where Chloe was knocking stones off a ledge with clean, precise kicks. Leo. Graduating West Point in June, he's taking his time with the offers. And Tommy Reed. Got a letter from CISA 3 weeks ago. Marcus called me confused by the letterhead. I had to explain the full story to him over dinner. I remembered Marcus's reaction after I detailed the 3-year operation, the transmitter, the flannel shirt, the courtroom. He'd looked at his beer for a long time before calling me an idiot. He took it well, I said. Cal made a sound that was almost a laugh. We watched Chloe abandon the stones to run drills she'd seen in a video, replicating them with diligent precision. She kicks well, Cal noted. Are you coaching her? I don't know how to play soccer. Then what are you teaching her? I thought about the notebooks, the dated entries, the sketches of Julian, the arrival and departure times recorded by a 7-year-old. Observation, I said. I'm teaching her to observe. Cal looked at Chloe in the afternoon light, then back at me. She already knows how. I know. You didn't teach her that. I know, I said again. She came that way. We sat there until the light faded and she ran inside, trailing grass and energy. She dropped the ball by the steps with the casual certainty of someone who finally knows where they belong. I went home every night. By that metric, everything was exactly right. People look at my victory and call it a perfect family revenge, but the truth is the cost was 1,500 days, living in the ashes of my own life. God granted humanity free will, but he also taught us about peace, something I traded away to nurse a cold, calculating retribution. Looking back at this journey, I have one piece of advice. Don't be like me. Don't turn your existence into a block of ice just to wait for one explosive moment in a courtroom. Family betrayal is a toxin. If you use darkness to fight darkness, you eventually forget how to see the sun. My perspective is simple. Justice is a necessity, but an obsession with family revenge can kill the soul long before the enemy falls. I won, but I lost 3 years of holding my daughter without a hidden agenda. Do not let family betrayal turn you into a machine. Choose to protect those you love with presence, not just through the lens of retaliation. Remember, the ultimate family revenge isn't sending someone to a cell. It's being able to smile peacefully in your new home. Rising above family betrayal to live a beautiful life is the heaviest sentence you can ever pass on a traitor.